How can we use AI to make students think harder and learn more without allowing the technology to do thinking for them? Today, I'm joined by Kevin, an educator with more than 12 years' experience as a classroom teacher and school administrator. Kevin holds a PhD in educational psychology with research focused on retrieval practice, how students strengthen learning by actively recalling and applying knowledge. He also works at educational technology companies to design AI tools grounded in the science of learning. In this episode, we'll explore how retrieval practice can improve student learning, how AI can provide personalized practice and feedback, and why effective implementation matters just as much as the technology itself. Welcome back to the Teacher's AI Cafe. I'm Kane, a teacher and a parent who wants AI to give us back our time. I share practical classroom-tested AI strategies to cut down your workload, improve your feedback, and reduce stress so you can get your evenings back and be more present with your friends and family. No jargon, just actionable steps. Grab your mug. Now let's get going. I'd like to welcome our guest for today. It's Kevin, all the way from Philly in the US. Welcome, Kevin. It's excellent. Thank you for joining us today. Tell us about yourself.
I've been in education for, about 12 years now, mostly as a classroom teacher. In the last 7 or 8 years, a little bit in administration, primarily around interventions and academic support. And then I got a PhD in educational psychology. And in the middle of that program, I was studying something called retrieval practice, how to get students to do this thing called retrieval practice on their own. So I was creating these what are called independent retrieval protocols. I was trying to get them to go home and do the thing that we always want them to do, which is study the right way. And I was thinking about really analog ways of getting them to do that. And it's not going to sound groundbreaking, but creating a protocol at the time was a niche for students to say, okay, if you do these things, you're going to be studying more effectively than your default study strategies. And this was something as simple as taking a blank piece of paper and imagining what's going to be on the test on Friday, that's writing down from first principles. Okay, this is what's going to be on the test on Friday. Here's what I need to know. Trying to do that for a few minutes, inevitably missing some things, and then consulting your notes on the feedback loop, doing that 3 times. And at the time that I had made some version of that for my students just intuitively. I had read a book called Make It Stick. I started to tweak some things in the protocol, and then I wanted to formally test it. That's what got me into that PhD program.
Okay. So retrievals obviously is a big one. It's common. I started realizing retrieval. So what area when you were teaching, what learning area were you in?
I was in English, but then somewhere I started teaching study skills class.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a retrieval. I might pick your brain elsewhere because I've got one class that they really struggle. Very low literacy year 8s, which is probably 13-year-olds, 13 to 14-year-olds. So yes, they really struggle and they do lots of strategies. And I like saying I talk about cognitive theory and how they learn, how they retain information. This is important. So they've got to understand how their brains work. So they understand how they study and why we've got to do things like retrieval every single lesson. Though the thing, I did one retrieval activity for 2 weeks straight and they still didn't get the test. These are very low ability students, but we're working on it. So if you give them some hints today, that would be fantastic.
I'm encouraged that over the last 4 or 5 years, more people are talking about retrieval. And I think as these things go, it goes from all right, put your notes away and just test yourself. Is a form of retrieval, but it's becoming more nuanced. There's a guy named Carl Hendrick, not reading him and following him. He just continues to circle back to this idea of retrieval and go a little deeper each time. And in fact, my dissertation, the actual experiment, it yielded a bunch of mixed results and had me thinking about some of the nuances of retrieval. So I think your experience of doing retrieval and figuring out that those details of what feedback you gave them and when you gave it to them, all those things really matter. But I do think for many people, going from 0 to 1, not doing retrieval, doing retrieval, is huge and awesome. But I think it is the journey of many of our careers that it can't be where we stop at, that we have to start saying, okay, what does retrieval look like for this exercise? What does it look like for this unit? How's that a little different than the unit before?
Most definitely, very important. And I always get his name, Egglesberg's forgetting chart. I always like to show them how quickly they forget the information. Well, getting back on, so in terms of this, are you a technology type teacher, or obviously we're talking about AI? How did you use that in your education, or is that something you developed over time as you move through your journey?
So when I was in the PhD program, I had to take a statistical analysis class. It was hard. I found myself at the time, maybe early 2023, started to use ChatGPT to test myself. So using it for retrieval. And I immediately saw this use case of, oh, when it's prompted well, or if I work with it a little bit, I can start to get reps with feedback that are really effective for me as a learner, knowing something about retrieval, knowing that it's hard and sticking with it.
Yes.
I knew that students wouldn't go through that process on their own, but I could start to create it. So that's what got me interested in it. And at the same time, I knew that retrieval protocol that I was creating, I had the instinct pretty early on that this would be more effective with something like AI, actually, as opposed to the lifeless notes of the students giving them
Yes.
feedback, which I think if you have good notes, that's great. I found my dissertation that some students had great notes, so they got great feedback. Some students, as you can imagine, didn't have great notes, so they didn't get as good feedback. As a result, they don't have as strong of a retrieval effect.
Yes.
And so I thought, could something like, even though AI is probabilistic, the chances of it being more consistent than a student's notes, with across 20 students in class is pretty high. So I had the instinct pretty early on that the tool that I was making would probably be better served with something with AI. So those two things, using it myself and then having the instinct that it could create retrieval practice with feedback for students, was how I got into it. And then I started talking with ed tech companies that wanted to use it in school. I started consulting with them about the learning science within it. And then slowly but surely I became a little bit more involved with the team that I worked with and their proud.
So how did you use technology or AI to bring that? And did you test it? Have you tested it out with students and got some data on that?
Yeah, great. So I guess to jump to the end, I don't know if I have hard data on that.
Okay.
What I found early on was that there are moments where I might try to ask students a question.
Yeah.
And you can think about it just from a ratio perspective. If I'm one teacher asking 20 students a question, I'm hoping all of them are thinking, but I'm not really checking. There's no way to validate
Yes. Yeah.
or verify that they're actually all thinking to the same level. And what happens is maybe a handful of students are thinking when you first ask the question. There's all sorts of strategies. So you shouldn't call on a student right away because that seems to make students think less.
Yes.
Once they realize, okay, it's uploaded to Kevin, he's going to answer for us. Timmy, don't have this. I don't have to continue to think.
Yes.
Goes the logic. This is like teach like a champion stuff. And so there's always these analog ways of trying to get students to think more in the classroom. There's like whiteboard things. Okay, every student now in this whiteboard situation is theoretically accountable to the retrieval instance plus the feedback. But I kind of thought that all of those were really creative ways of trying to get closer to ultimate retrieval exercise would be like conversation with an expert. And you can give me an answer and I, Kevin, the expert, am able to meet you exactly where you're right and exactly where you're wrong and bring you along that line by continually asking questions, ideally with feedback that might be direct when appropriate. And so I guess to get right to it, I knew right away that when I was asking questions to students, not all of them were thinking. And I loved the idea that if I gave them a prompt, if there was a program, the first one I saw that did this really well was a program called Flint, where I could create a series of questions that all the students have to answer. And there's typing back and forth with this chatbot that's responding directly to that. Now, again, people are like, oh, if that's done well, that sounds cool. But if it's not done well, it doesn't sound cool. When I tested it, I thought, oh, this starts to look like it would be better than what I'm able to do in the front of the classroom. And so I was really just going with instinct. I do think that these things should be tested. It would be really cool to do an A/B test to see if these students actually engage with the chatbot is better than me in front of the classroom, asking that question to the whole group and getting one or two responses back. But my instinct was that it was doing something that I couldn't do that I always wanted to do, which was have an individual conversation with each student that I could then monitor on the back.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Flint is one. A couple of other people have made. It seems to be US schools. It's a popular program. We don't use it here in Australia. I know the person I spoke to, they're up in Boston, and the US school in Hong Kong both use Flint. So obviously it's a widely adopted or promoted platform that's actually out there. So I guess in terms of this data, how have you how have you looked at using AI? Obviously you looked at Flint. Have you looked at some other tools or some way you think you'd like to design your own tool? Have you tried doing that or vibe coding, fill this gap out?
Yeah, well, one of the things I did early on with Flint was I loved it. I could see where it was going, but I thought that there was the instinct within the program to not really put the ball back in students' court. So like the student would say one thing and the chatbot would say, oh, Kane, thanks for that. I'm sure you meant, and then elaborate.
Yes.
And I thought, no, we should be putting the ball back in the students' report as often as possible, make them get as many reps at trying to articulate the answer. Don't do any synthesis for the student, like putting things together, have the student actually do that. And so I started consulting with the team about retrieval practice, presented to the engineering team. I started leaving some notes when I would have interactions with the actual product. And so that's how I started. And I loved that work because I felt like I was helping build something that could start to do things better than what I could do in the direction that I wanted to do them. So I have since then worked with maybe 4 or 5 teams. I'm working with 3 now, all that do different things. One other, like Flint, is a Socratic dialogue program called Joyce Schooler, but each of them have different missions. There's one that's writing just exclusively for English classrooms, or that was the original design was English classrooms. I think they're probably going to expand to any writing classroom, like industry classroom. But it's really an AI tutor designed for something like a thesis-driven paper. And then there's another program called Teach AI that is convinced that the sort of Socratic dialogue, put the computer in front of the student and have them engage with the curriculum. That's not going to be the way that students learn more. That pairing a teacher with an AI-assisted sort of like teaching assistant that's going to help you call on the curriculum and then create retrieval practice, create handouts, create lesson plans that are designed on 1, the curriculum, and then 2, the student data that we're getting. That's going to be the way towards student outcomes. So it is amazing to watch the proliferation of this one tool, AI, and then how people are thinking about how to use it for student outcomes.
Okay, yeah. That's quite interesting. So these are products that were in development with these different companies. Is AI being used in any shape or form, or has there been any in your private school that you're at? How is AI being used? That obviously you've got you in there pushing these different ideas. What's the environment like? Is it well supported? Is there a lot of pushback from using AI? Because there was obviously a lot of debate around that at the moment as well across the world that I'm reading.
Yeah, it's just so varied. There was a moment where I was so excited about AI and I was confused about the reception that I was seeing. And then there was a moment where, and I think this happens everywhere, where the IT director gets in front of the school and says, hey, look, I need to remind everybody to move towards Google Drive and away from their hard files. And I thought, here I am trying to push AI. People are still saving things on their computers. So there's such a range of how people are thinking about technology, or maybe better yet, not how they're thinking, but how they're defaulting to the use. And I think that's where you see this range. It's like, all right, some people's default is just save things manually in a file on the computer, other people in the drive, and then other people still are thinking about how to use AI to teach writing. And it's such a large range. I think also when I talk to, and just taking it outside of my school, when I talk to other directors of technology, they go all the way down to like, we're not 100% confident. These directors that I speak to, they're not confident that everyone's using just the Chromebook well or the computer well in the classroom, that they're not actually monitoring or regulating students' attention in relation to that thing. So you walk into one classroom, what I've heard, I think I heard this the other day, and they might have rules around when to open the Chromebook or when not to open the Chromebook. And then they walk into another teacher's classroom and everyone's Chromebook is open, although the lesson doesn't require it in that moment. So what I keep hearing is that is so perennial and fundamental right now that probably when we talk about AI, we have to include some training that starts at that basic level. Like, or when do we even think about telling students rather to open a Chromebook, yet alone start to move towards the AI product? So I repeat that only because I've seen that in my own school and practice, that there's just such a range of how we're thinking about tech, at basic from computers to AI.
Yes, having been managing the digital learning aspects of a very large high school, I do know it's good. Got you. Leaders, trendsetters, all the way to people who refuse to use the devices at all and quite anti, which is absolutely fine because everyone's at different stage of their journey and we build on their strengths. So there's been no real formal, are your students allowed to use AI? And so there's been no formal training, say in your educational district around AI or discussion on using it?
No, there definitely has. We had a consultant come into the building, and I remember that being interesting to watch everybody's reception. And I thought this gentleman, his name's Eric Hudson, did a great job of taking us from here's what AI is, here's how to think about it, here's how people used to think about it, here's what it actually looks like, here's a bunch of use cases. If you find yourself skeptical of what it can do, let me just show you just how powerful it is. And then I thought he was really good at challenging us to think as a faculty about, okay, if it truly can do everything he just showed us, and students are sure to catch on to that at some point, what does that mean for the take-home essay or the take-home homework assignment? What does that mean for the things that we default to on a regular basis, like an open note quiz in some cases? And it was interesting to watch teachers start to wrestle with that. Okay, does that render this sort of moot? Now, so we have had some training, and I think everybody's going to say that's probably not enough. Like, how do you catch up to a moving target like this? So, no, I don't want to take anything away from school. We're definitely trying to prepare us and have us think about this, and it is really hard, I think, in a one-off private school. It's even harder in a large district. You can tell me.
Yeah.
Let's go on the other side and be really descriptive, because then you have a failure mode on both ends. When there's no regulation, I think there could be a failure mode, as we just discussed. And when you're over-regulated, I don't know if you give teachers the opportunity to actually experiment with these things that they end up using really effectively.
Yeah, I guess in our system, teachers have almost, I understand, other US teachers, pretty much teachers can do what we want in our classrooms. We were talking about the other day at school that if you're an experienced teacher, you'll rarely ever see a deputy or a principal come through or talk to you about your classroom. They just leave you to it. And as long as you're getting the results, they don't bother you. I know different schools have different systems. They're quite more controlled than others. So I know Australian schools in general, private or public, you tend to have lots and lots of flexibility. We've got a curriculum. We normally have set assessments, and then you can do whatever you want around that in terms of your classroom. So very much varies, which makes it hard. That problem we have here is often they'll come with an idea, you get one PD or professional learning, whatever, and then they expect you to use it and they never follow up. And that's one of the reasons I started my podcast, because you get people in. I was talking to a guy on one of the AI for Teachers Facebook group, and he was saying, last year I've got to run AI again. What new tools can I show him? I was saying, why are you showing him new tools? He was trying to find the new gimmick thing. I said, why don't you just build on what you did the year before and actually see how efficiently people use it and expand their skills on one tool instead of trying to throw lots of different things at them. Pretty much it scatters their brain, fragments their focus, and when they're trying to learn a new tool or a new way of actually working with their students and also themselves at home.
And can I ask you, you mentioned as long as teachers are getting the results that the administration wants, they're not going to bother them.
Yeah.
What are those results?
It's academic results. So
how measurable are those?
It'll be, like for example, we might have 2 assessments a term. So we have 10-week terms. Normally we do 2 or 3 assessments, and you're looked on those grades. But even when you get those, there's, looking at their data, we have San Jose testing called NAPLAN. So we know students of high literacy generally do well in your classes. One don't will struggle. You never really get questioned unless it's really different from what they get in other classes, that you're probably hitting the average or where those students should actually be. We do fail our students. I know in the US you have grade inflation. So I've had students, they'll get 15, 20% for the year or for a semester, and they get what we call an E grade. So we accept failure. I don't know if it's in your school. I just hear online, there's a lot of, you hear plans that not allowed to fail students. And I'm pretty much students, no, you didn't hand it in, you got a 0. You got till tomorrow to get it in. Otherwise it's 0. And we don't do I think you guys can do extra credit and things like that. Is that I hear about that, but we don't have things like that. You have a set assessment, and if a student's working away, say 2 weeks, the day comes back and said, your assessment's due here, set it, they might get 5, 10%. That's their result. It's like, because we've got to hit our timetables. Yeah.
Do you think that there are such measurable outcomes? Do you think that would incentivize experimentation?
Oh, no, I would love to do everything different. And how we do it, I'd love the students basically to sit in assessment, even at the most basic level. And I've argued this, but simply we're so busy timetable-wise, we can't do it. So essentially, I'd love for students to sit the assessment. It's accessible. We give them revision feedback, and they sit a small variation of that and have another go at it, because that's what happens in life. And I've pushed it. We have a 10-week term, 2 assessments. By the time you do that, we just physically don't have time while we're still trying to cover the curriculum. So I'm teaching history. This term, we've got to cover the curriculum, which is still way more than we can cover in 10 weeks. At times, we choose what we want to assess. So I said, we're only going to assess these particular skills, this knowledge. So in this case, we usually do a source analysis and then an essay writing to develop those 2 skills. But yeah, if we assess it differently, and apparently before I was a teacher, it was very different. I've been a teacher since 2013. Before that, I was a career in IT professional. So a different sort of environment. And I've argued our system doesn't work like that because, as I say, what we assess determines what we teach. And But no, we do it, teach them to make sure the students do well on the test. And what we do is we teach all the core thing of that, and then we put all the fun things or the extra interesting things. What we teach is interesting. We put the different ideas and things on top of that once we've taught them all those core skills and knowledge going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. No, I'll be really curious to see here which schools are faster to experiment with AIs. There's schools that actually have the measurable outcomes, that have the benchmark or the assessments laid out, or is it the ones that don't? I could see a case for either, right? I can see the measurable outcome saying, look, we can now do this. We can actually do something like an experiment here, some sort of pseudo experimental design, and see if the use of these AI tools in this way, in this context, actually improves the outcome.
But there's can be within that, and I use AI. It's in summarize, I can alter my resources very quickly. Going back when my previous school, we all had one-to-one devices, so all had MacBooks. I could use what's called OneNote. I'd put all my resources on OneNote and I'd annotate with my iPad, write all over it. The students did very well because they could see all the information, but they could see all the notes we were talking about as I annotated and wrote on top of it. So that was just giving additional feedback. I'd ask questions I could highlight and write extra notes in there. Whereas my current school, I can't do that. And that's where I see the AI. We're not allowed to use it, as I said, but we can see that gap in there. If you give them particular tasks and things, you can do that. Where I'm using AI lately is ChatGPT allows you to make websites now, which is fantastic. So I'm actually building custom websites specifically for what my students actually need. So often we go to a website online, people makes it, has some of the bits we don't want. With ChatGPT using their sites, I can customize exactly what I want and then share it. For example, the other day I built an escape room, a revision activity escape room for the students, specifically with the knowledge I need them to actually do. So that's where I look at AI at the moment. In my context, is I can use it to build specific tools that my students use and that they access through online, or they're using it on pen and paper. And I find it very good for that. But the core of that, I'm using my teacher judgment to make those decisions and then modify and develop those resources based on my knowledge. So that's where I think AI sits at the moment. I'd love to be more automated, but at the same time, we're a very low socioeconomic school government, so we don't pay for it. We wouldn't pay, for example, that Flint program. We don't have the funds that pay for those sort of things. We use Education Perfect. Have you got that in the US? I don't know if it's one year. We pay for that. That's got funding for it, and that's got a bit of AI in it. But like I said, we're really using it, creating the learning resources we need for our students based on usually existing resources and modifying and changing them. If you can imagine everything, what would you like to see coming through AI for staff or students or both?
I'm going to share my screen because I talked to ed tech companies.
Yeah.
I was part of this document. And is your podcast only audio?
No, I could link it in. So if you send me the document, I'm quite happy to share it. Yeah, it's audio only.
So I put it this way, and I'll post it in this list. These are some principles of teaching and learning. Yes. I don't know if you started at 0. I don't know if this would be super helpful because there's going to be more foundational things. But oftentimes when I talk to teachers about supporting students that they need more support, these are the things that I keep going back to. So again, this is not a teacher starting at 0. This is a teacher who has been teaching, who is trying to think about how to support students. And I think this list would scale to how to use ed tech or AI in the classroom. And so what I think about is I want to make sure that the students are getting the best rep in the ring. What I mean by that is I don't want to walk in and see the teacher getting way more expert. I don't want to see them becoming more expert at the thing. I want the students becoming more expert at the thing. So what does that look like? If the teacher is like connecting all the dots and saying everything, that's okay, as long as the student then gets a chance to do that. Which brings me to the second point here, put the ball back in their hands. So I want the student to be getting the rep, actually taking the swing at the thing and trying. The teacher can model that. Other things can model that, but the student needs to get that rep, which at some point, the ball has to get passed to the student. It should be like a good workout, meaning like it should be actually really hard. We know this from, stuff on deliberate practice or desirable difficulties, even the foundation of retrieval practice, I think, based off of those two things. We want it to be challenging. I can double click on what challenging looks like, but it should be harder than I think students, sometimes their instinct leads them to think it should be. For example, I'm in an all boys school. They have this instinct of like going to the gym and facilitating a good workout for me. They know that if I do the reps too easily, they know they should add reps or they should add weight or something. And they know that I should do it more than a week, et cetera, et cetera. They know all these things about fitness, but then if I ask them about algebra, all of those things fall away. They're like, I want it to be as easy as possible, as few times as possible a week.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to shift that in towards think about it like a workout. And then teachers need to be facilitating that. They need to be doing difficult things in the classroom. They should be focusing on the weakest part of the game. And I think this one becomes obvious that like where AI or ed tech can start to do that and scale. It's going to be really hard for a teacher to find the weakest part of each student's game, so to speak, and then start to give them practice towards that. But I think AI can start to do that when well facilitated by a teacher. I'll skip E over for a second. And then really, I think the headline would be something like, I want ed tech to make it as easy as possible to work really hard and to work really hard specifically on the things that you need to get better at. If teachers can go through this checklist and say, I'm doing this in the classroom without ed tech or AI, then great, keep doing that. And try to do it better, but keep doing that. If they look at this and they're like, oh, it's really hard to do, let's say, it's really hard to do D, focus on the weakest part of your game to improve your game. It's really hard to do that and scale with all my students. Then it's okay. Are there opportunities to use technology to do that? That would be, I don't know if that's too vague or too much of a non-answer, but when I look at this checklist, this is what I think about AI in sort of ideal state.
I think that's spot on, actually. And I see the role. And I say to my students, your head's got to hurt. Otherwise, you're not learning anything. But yeah, I do see the role of ed tech. I think I've always been a big tech person. And the trick is obviously good design. And I guess what we got earlier on is I can't comment on everything. Everyone's rushed products out, obviously, to take advantage of it. It doesn't mean we've got good design behind them. And that's where I guess a lot of educators are quite wary at this point, I think.
Yeah, I think to the point of your podcast, why I'm so excited about its mission is I think people are thinking more about design, and that's important.
Yes.
I think the next thing you're going to see people talk a lot about is implementation. And that's going to swing back to the teachers and the schools and the administration. There's only so much. I think maybe people can get really crafty in design to think about how the design will be implemented. Sure. But that can maybe only meet the best way. At some point, you have to hand the thing to the teachers and the administration. And so I think both need to be thinking about these principles, both in the design, but also in the implementation. And I think your podcast is going to be really helpful. Or at least it seems like it could be really helpful to getting teachers, school leaders to think really hard about that.
Most definitely, yes. I think that's good. If you send me that slide, I can attach it with just a Google link anyway. I took a screen grab of it, if you're happy to do that, which is good. So in terms of your ed tech products, do you know how far along or something they're going to release? Are they going to be free or the ones that are getting developed? I'm just curious. I've got a couple of minutes to talk about.
I'm going to connect you with each of the CEOs.
Okay.
They're all already in the market, and none of them are free. So I hate to tell you that, but I think the most important thing is regardless of the product is how each product is thinking about these principles, and then how even if you're not going to use the product, I think you can watch that product, see how it's designed, think about how you would implement it, and then apply that to any tool that you do end up using.
It would be quite interesting, yes. Maybe because education is so broad and everyone's different. Every context is different. So it makes it quite interesting. I think we'll wrap it up there. And thank you for coming on today, Kevin. It's been fantastic talking to you on the other side of the world.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Cool.